going to ask you some questions about forward bends. Sometimes my nemesis. Forward bends have been hard for me. I would love it if you would tell us from your perspective some of the main objectives of forward bends. First the physical, then the psychological, and then maybe the pranic. Benefits of forward bends. And I'm thinking more seated forward bends, right? Because they're more effective. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, seated forward bends make the hamstring work a little more. Physically, I think probably the most important part is that it stretches the hamstring, which then controls a variety of things, how you get up, how you walk. People with tight hamstring, every time they want to pick up something from the floor, they round their back.
Right.
And in fact, as a result of that observation, that rounding of the back, that causes back problems. Majority of the people get because of that. I like to call what is called forward bends in yoga, I like to call them forward fold.
Tell us why.
Because round immediately suggests I'm rounding my back to do it.
You mean a bend?
A bend.
But a fold is a sharper...
Fold is you're folding from the pelvis. In fact, what would look a good forward bend, even in a book, even if you see Mr. Anga's picture, when he begins it, there is a back bend. The lumbar is bending back, and then he folds forward. He's not rounding the lumbar.
Right.
The postures in which the lumbar is actually rounded, and even that is done more with dorsal spine. But rounding happens in Bakasana, arm balance is like that.
Which are not forward bends in
Which
the
are
classic
not forward
sense.
bends, yeah.
Right. Do you believe that hamstrings are the tightest muscle for Westerners? Or do you think it's quadriceps?
The complementary are there. So
it's a tough question.
it's connected with tightness of the hip joint. Yes, Westerners tend to have a tighter hamstring.
Yeah.
But I find Indians also have a very tight hamstrings.
And so why do you think that is? Do you think it's from sitting?
From sitting in the wrong way.
So if you're sitting more anatomically neutral, your hamstrings don't get tight? Or
They
not
won't get as tight.
As tight. Right.
Yes, people who sit and round their back,
Right.
their hamstrings get tighter.
Right. Because the top of the hamstring is getting pushed towards the bottom of the hamstring.
Towards the bottom.
Yeah. So on the physical level, if someone does a lot of forward bends to get their hamstrings to open, their life will be better? Just from a movement perspective is what you're saying?
Assuming everything else in the life remains same, the longer hamstring will make life better.
Okay.
Because
we're trying to encourage people to do forward bends. So, okay. And then what is the psychological effect of doing forward bend practice?
I think generally when you do a forward bend, the head is going down. Supporting that head gives a sense of soothing. You are cutting off from the outer world more. Focusing in your own inner world, which generally would create more calmness.
Is that, okay, so if you're doing a forward fold with the head supported, you're staying longer than you would if you were not supporting the head. So would the effect of not supporting the head give you a slightly different psychological
Different
aspect?
in the sense there'll be less psychological relaxation.
But do you gain anything from not doing it with the head supported and staying longer?
Yes.
Can you say what?
You gain more effect of stretching the hamstring, the effect going to the pelvic abdominal organs more by lifting up.
Right.
As soon as you support the head,
Right.
the pelvic area doesn't stretch as much.
Right.
Doesn't receive the effect of the forward bend.
Right. Okay. So, and then can you talk a little bit about the pranic effect? I would love it if you could say a little bit about apana vayu. Forward bends are always encouraged to make apana vayu more alive. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, let's be clear about what this apana vayu is, because it's even confused by people who study the Bhagavad Gita. They call inhalation as pranavayu, exhalation as apana vayu. In yoga, we don't do that. Pranavayu is what moves in the chest much more. On exhalation in, exhalation out, inhalation in. The effect of that on the pelvic abdominal area is what we recognize as movement of apana vayu.
Interesting. Now, is that written anywhere, or is that just something that you know?
I have not seen it written anywhere. The way my teachers taught me, I have assumed that is written.
So I think what you're saying is that in yoga, or thinking of it in a yoga perspective, that prana and apana is more location, meaning upper body, lower body? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So it's not as tied to the inhale, exhale.
It is tied to inhale, exhale. On inhalation, the movement of the apana vayu is downwards.
Right.
On exhalation, it is upwards.
Right.
In fact, I have come to believe, and some teachers do teach this way, that it is the movement of apana vayu that is responsible for causing inhalation and exhalation.
Mm-hmm. And that's why you teach that the breath begins at the pelvic floor on the inhale and the exhale.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. Okay, so then can you say why forward folds are help bring the apana vayu more alive?
Because you are creating a pressure on the pelvis, on the abdominal area as you bend forward. So it pushes the apana vayu not only down towards the pelvic floor, but pushes to the back of the body. And that's what you actually, in a good yoga asana practice, that's what you want to watch. How the movement is not in the front of the abdominal area, but how it is along your spine at the back.
Mm-hmm. So when I experience more apana in my body, for instance, like at the onset of menstruation, I just feel more calm. I just feel more grounded. So how does that relate to what you're describing?
I think the calmness that you feel, not being a woman, I'm imagining, is because of certain other toxicity releasing.
Mm.
I don't think it is directly related to apana vayu.
Interesting. Okay. We've talked about the main roadblock on a physical level for students doing forward bends is hamstrings, but you're one of the few teachers I've heard talk about hip rotators are also a big hindrance in forward bends, and I was wondering if you would just say a little more about that.
It's very easy to prove that.
I'm not saying it's not true. I just don't think most people talk about it.
Which is unfortunate, because not at an average person not doing yoga, but for people who have done yoga for a while, when they are finding difficult for that forward fold, put them in Baddha Konasana, they can't bend forward. Put them in Dandasana and they can bend forward, which means the hamstring stretch is not stopping them.
Right.
But the rotators around the hip are tighter.
Right. And is there any psychological or pranic aspect to hamstrings are more open, hip rotators are less open?
Yes, obviously, whatever is tight, okay, the pranic energy does not move there.
Mm.
So it has a different effect. If the pranic energy can move more readily into the legs and the hamstring, but not around the rotators of the hip joint, then it's going to not create as good a health in the pelvic area as it should.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So if someone's hamstrings are more open than their hip rotators, and that's what's holding them back in forward bends, you're saying Baddha Konasana, more Baddha Konasana. Is there anything else you would suggest to work
More
on?
Baddha Konasana.
That's it? An hour a day?
But in Baddha Konasana, for someone like that, I would suggest that don't hold the posture. Don't go down and hold the posture. Go down and come up. Go down and come up. Okay? Not like it's cardiovascular.
Right.
Slowly go
Slowly,
down and come up.
So that each time you're going down, you're lightly stretching the hip rotators, and then
Yes.
to get them to yield.
I think that kind of repetitive movement would open up that area more.
Hmm.
Most people, after they've done it 10, 20 times, will be able to go a little further.
Okay, so that was my next question. How many times? 10 or 20?
10 or 20.
And then
But
every day?
Every day, even twice a day if you can.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But in going forward like that, remember what I said is that it's not a forward bend as much as a forward fold. So try and fold, which means as you come down in Baddha Konasana, try and take your chin as far forward as you can, not simply down towards the floor.
Right.
Okay? So you extend forward, both in back bends and forward bends. Although the spine itself stretches, the emphasis of stretch is on the flank of the body.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you've brought up Baddha Konasana, and I think it's such an interesting pose in the category of forward folds, because in most forward folds you have at least one leg straight, but in Baddha Konasana you find just what you're saying is some people are really good at forward folds with the straight legs, and then they go into Baddha Konasana and their knees and their ears are near each other. So, and also you have to externally rotate the femurs coming into that. But it's always on like a must-do of poses, Baddha Konasana. So you've elaborated some of the reasons. Can you say a little bit more about why Baddha Konasana is such an important pose?
Because it moves the energy into the pelvic area, unlike any other forward fold will do. That movement is not created by any other pose as effectively as it is happening in Baddha Konasana. Even Upavishta Konasana does not quite do that.
Is it because the feet are together and you can work the feet? Is that part of it? I mean, obviously the femurs are wide, but Upavishta doesn't do it as well. So
Upavishta does not do it as well as Baddha Konasana does.
So the difference is the feet, right?
The position of the leg, yes, definitely. See, if whatever muscle is able to do a pose will generally tend to take over. So if you are doing a forward fold in Upavishta, the hamstring says, I will help, which then doesn't let the rotators work as much. Whereas in Baddha Konasana, hamstrings cannot help.
Right. That's really good. Yeah. And then you also have the added access to the feet. Like pushing into each other is got to give you something, right?
Yeah, it'll stop the hamstring helping, and it would encourage the rotators to work more. Otherwise, you are going to feel a lot of pressure on your ankle.
So the outer ankle tends to bow a little bit. So you would say to lift the outer ankle up, yeah, to keep it more Tadasana foot-like. And while we're on the feet, there seems to be a lot of debate about, is it better? Some teachers have you open the feet. You know, you hear that instruction, open your feet like the pages of a book. And some people say push the feet into each other. Can you say a little bit about what you think?
Both are wrong and both are correct.
Okay, I love that answer. Now tell us why.
See, for someone who can do Baddha Konasana fairly well, progressively to go into deeper action of the hip, open the feet and lift the feet up.
But isn't that straining the ankle, which you just said you shouldn't do?
So learn to do that without straining the ankle. For someone who is very tight and can barely do this posture, keep the feet on the floor and don't open the ankle. Keep the feet closed. Okay? But once you are able to bend down completely in that, where your ribs are touching the
That's hardly
feet,
anybody. Let's just be real here.
then there is more advanced poses which help you to open the hip joint much better. Like Mula Bandhasana.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. Okay. Okay, so being a tighter person, not being able to forward fold in Baddha Konasana very well, so I'm going to keep the feet together. So I often experience the heel of one foot is pushing more and the ball of the opposite foot is pushing more. Does that sound like a common?
You first thank God that you are able to sense the difference.
Yeah.
If you don't sense the difference, you can do nothing about it. If you sense the difference, then purposely, not after going down, but as you go down, try and keep the heel that's not working more active.
So it's more important to really press the heels into one another rather than the balls of the feet?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I don't want to, by that I don't want to mean that it is not important to push the ball of the foot together. Only the heel is more important.
So in other words, when you're pressing the foot hopefully evenly, you're pressing the heels a little bit more evenly than the ball, with more force, I guess.
Yes.
Not the best word there, but all right. So a few instructions I've heard you give over the years in symmetrical forward bends. You always say to ground the femurs first. Can you say why we start with that and what you mean by that?
Ground the femur has nothing to do with the ground.
Right.
Although when you are seated on the floor, you can think of that as a ground. Otherwise, ground means the back of the thigh.
Right.
You are trying to push the femur into the back of the thigh. Because when there is tightness, the femur tends to lift away from that.
Right.
What automatically happens is generally wrong.
Yes.
This is a standard way of looking at many yoga postures. Because automatically the body is lazy.
But the difficulty with that is when you try to press the femurs down when you're sitting on the floor, they pop up because you're working, too hard? So is that?
Yeah, they will pop up. So learn to ground the femur, keeping your back safe, meaning lying down on your back. So rather than sit on the floor with the legs forward and bend forward like in Paschimottanasana and postures like that, lie down on the floor, Supta Padangushtasana.
Mm-hmm.
Much better way to stretch the hamstring because your back is safe.
Right. Although a lot of people in that pose push their lower back into the floor.
Well, then you can immediately sense that, right? Put something under the lower back.
Yeah. Oh, you mean like a little towel or something?
Little folded
so that
towel.
they can't do it.
So they can.
That's a good idea. So why do you start with the femurs, though? I mean, the foundation of the pose, you could say, are the sitting bone. Let's say you're sitting on the floor. You're flexible enough that you don't need a blanket under your pelvis. You're saying, are the femur bones the foundation of that pose?
For people whose hamstrings are tight, yes.
Mm-hmm. For people whose hamstrings are not tight?
For people whose hamstrings are not tight, I would say the rotators are the foundation of the pose.
Mm-hmm. So depending on who you were teaching, you would instruct rotate your pelvis first to people who have more open
Yes,
hips.
generally, as an experienced yoga teacher, one would assume that of the two, the hamstrings are tighter.
Right.
For a beginner.
Right.
For somebody who is very flexible. And then there's cultural differences, like the Oriental people, Chinese particularly, tend to have a very, hamstring is fine, stretched out.
But rotators not?
Rotators are not. I'm impressed by, we can learn from each other.
Mm-hmm. But you don't know, like a lifestyle thing. You think it's more like just...
No, it is lifestyle related, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that many Chinese, or I don't know what they do in China or within their home. But Indians generally sit to eat in a cross-legged position,
Mm-hmm.
okay, which doesn't stretch the hamstring.
Right.
Maybe the Chinese are doing something which stretches the hamstring. And then there is, they have grown up with that culture, inherited that body.
Right.
So it is different.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. Okay, so another instruction you say a lot in forward folds is move the left hip bone towards the right knee and vice versa. So can you talk about that physically and pranically?
That instruction is, although we give it in every class, is really meant for somebody who is little more advanced.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea there is to keep the sacrum wide. First in the back of the sacrum, then in the front of the sacrum. Then from front of the sacrum we go all the way to the tailbone, which gives a much deeper understanding of how to fold forward rather than round the back.
Well, one of the effects, and I don't know if you're looking for this in that instruction, but one of the effects in my body when I do that is my transverse abdominis just not, it doesn't overly engage, but it engages in a nice tone way to, like, for support.
Correct.
Is that one of the reasons that you instruct
One of the
that?
reasons, yes.
Okay. And then also, do you think most people have some twist in their pelvis that you would, that would be beneficial?
No, I wouldn't say most people. I think all people.
Okay, I was gonna say, okay. So it's more or less everybody has a slight twist to it, to an extreme twist.
Yeah. Everybody is either, predominantly right-handed
Mm-hmm.
or left-handed. There are very few people who are born, what is the word?
Ambidextrous.
Yeah, ambidextrous.
Mm-hmm.
Very few.
Right. So you're saying just by, like, I'm left-handed, so because then I'm left doing stuff, so I'm twisting over and over again a certain way, and that over time
Yeah.
creates.
And you have inherited that body from somebody who is also like that.
Right. Right. Okay. So another instruction you give is for the bent leg, let's say in Janushirshasana, along the femur bones away from the hips, think more of releasing from the hip joints. That's still the same, trying to release the hip rotators. Is that the instruction?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so more subtle points you talk about are, I love this one, and I would love you to say something. Grounding the femurs, compare the space in the inner ears. Okay, talk to me about that.
Ear is a sense organ. You can't immediately do anything with that organ. But experience has shown that the more you are able to ground the femur, the more open that ear will be. But over the years I have learned that for some people it is not quite the same thing, it's the opposite ear. So my conclusion or my understanding has been through that if the opening in the ear is related to musculoskeletal part, then it will be on the same side. If it is related to more neurological aspect, it will be on the opposite side.
Okay, so if it's more skeletal muscular, easy, you can just do that side longer, more often. What if it's the second one? That it's that it's your nervous system. How would you work differently? Same?
You again do the same
Same
thing.
thing?
Yeah.
But you're saying it's the opposite. So for instance, I have less space in my right ear, but my left femur and my left hamstring's tighter. You're saying work the left to the right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, interesting.
And not exclusively, but
Right.
emphasizing that.
Mm-hmm. So you have found that some people it's same side, and some people it's crossed.
Yes.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Okay, so another
People who are more flexible, I would tend to find it's on the same side. And again, not exclusively,
Right.
but predominantly. Generally.
That's a great observation. Okay, sometimes you asked us to compare the space in the groins. The leg of the groin in which there is more space is working better and is considered hot. So on this side, you tell us to work through the center of the bone. The other leg is considered as cold, so there you would work through the circumference of the bone.
Now, hot and cold are the terms we use because the language doesn't have any other term. But it's not really heat and cold. It's a different sensation. the comparison I would give is, think of a headache. Most people have experienced headache, very few people have not. Okay? That headache can be feverish and hot, or it can be dull, achy kind of headache. That's what I mean when I say hot and cold. It's that sensation.
Mm-hmm. So it's more like an energy thing, not a
Energy.
temperature thing.
Yes.
Okay, so can you say why, if the better side is considered hot, you work through the center of the bone?
Because generally in engineering we know this principle that when something expands from very narrow to wider, it cools down.
Oh, okay.
Whole refrigeration principle originally is that.
But you just said it's not a temperature thing, but they're similar in energies?
They're similar
Okay.
in energy.
Okay, so then the side that's not working as well, you work through the circumference of the bone, and that's because, tell us, who aren't engineering students?
It's the opposite, right? From wider space, if you narrow it down, it tends to create heat.
I see.
And the first time my teacher, Mr. Iyengar, pointed this out to me, I was amazed that how did he know engineering? Because he's not an engineer, far from it.
It just shows that if you're a really good yogi, you have to figure out engineering,
You
right,
have to
of the
figure out
body.
Or you sense the same thing.
Uh-huh,
So you're coming from two different worlds,
right.
and yet the conclusion is the same.
And so obviously you have worked with this principle a lot in your own practice, and you find that it's more effective than working at a more superficial level?
Yeah, for sure. It's more effective in a very deep sense, in that although I'm trying to work with the body and do variety of things with my skeletal body, muscles and so on, my intention is to train my mind.
Mm-hmm. Right, but you're going to, okay, so with that instruction, I'm imagining that I'm doing that, but am I really doing that?
Imagination is a very interesting aspect. If imagination is a delusion, then it doesn't help. It makes matters worse. But if imagination takes me towards what a good yogi will experience, that imagination is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Patanjali very strongly objects to imagination. But he by that means, deluding oneself.
Right. But I've often heard you say, even if you can't feel it, imagine it, because it will eventually come.
Yes, assuming that you are imagining in the correct direction.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Okay, then you have working on energetic symmetry, temperature of left leg, temperature of right leg. Again, not talking about actual temperature, but what we just talked about.
Yeah. For imagination, take one more example. If I badly want to levitate, okay, logically I know the body is never going to do that.
What? You're a yogi. I would imagine you levitate all the time.
I do, but not the body. I'm not the body. But if I keep wanting that, it's very likely that I'll have a dream. Because that kind of imagination creates a certain tension which the brain needs to release. It will release it by dreaming about it.
There's a lot in that sentence.
There's too much in that.
So, well, you hear stories of great yogis levitating. Do you not believe that? Or being able to master levitating, let's say it that way.
I would like to believe that. I have never witnessed it.
Okay.
So, yes, I don't
You'd
believe
be
it.
open to the idea, but you haven't witnessed it yourself, so
Right.
yeah. Okay.
The explanation that's been given to me, or I read it in a book, is that you fill up your body so much with air that you can then practically walk on water. You are so light. Again, I've heard it, I've never seen evidence of it. What I have seen evidence of is somebody who can take a lot of air in, like, and really fill up the body as it were there, can stay underwater longer. I have seen that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's possible to feel the body like that.
Yeah. So you're open.
So I'm
Just
open.
so any levitators out there, let us know. I'd love to see it. Okay, that's an interesting explanation. Okay, another instruction you give.
See, the most recent case I have heard of a particular guru claiming he can teach levitation. And, I had big following, I'm not going to mention the name. But he had 2 helicopters. And I wondered, if you can levitate, what are you doing with the helicopter?
Well, maybe he can float up, but he can't actually move forward in space, right? So maybe he's a beginner.
He would claim he would. He claimed he moved from India to England and so on.
Oh, okay.
So even faster than a helicopter.
Okay. Well, he could be shot down. Maybe that's why.
Yes.
All right. So going back to more physical things.
More seriously, there is so much to do with what I know. Why do I want to waste my energy into things that I have really no knowledge of?
I would agree. You have a very practical approach. I think it's good. Okay, another instruction. I'm going to again imagine that the imaginary students in Paschimottanasana, the skin of the buttocks moves down even as the pelvis untucks. Now, I've studied with you long enough to understand what you mean because you've adjusted me. But would you be able to put that in words, what the effect is of that?
The effect is to do what we talked about very early on in today's class, today's conversation. Mm-hmm. You should be able to divide the body up into minute parts and work with each part separately.
Okay, so when a human untucks their pelvis, the flesh of the buttock lifts.
Automatically.
Right.
Yes.
So why is that undesirable if we're wanting to untuck?
No, it's not undesirable. You have the ability to move simultaneously in 2 different parts.
But if you're asking us to do this, I'm saying, okay, the pelvis is physically untucking, but I've had you come over and take your hands to the top of the buttock and just kind of traction it down. Is it because it's compressing the lumbar?
No, because it's creating a compression in the back, yes, lumbar, but in the back of the lumbar.
I see. So the untuck is opening the front of the lumbar, and because there's more pressure on the back of the lumbar, releasing the buttock helps
releasing
that.
The back, yeah.
I love talking minutia with you. It's awesome. Okay, keeping the heads of the femurs and their sockets, move the top of the femurs away from each other. Okay, so my experience in that instruction is my hip rotators go on. Is that your intention?
No, the intention is more energetic.
Okay, can you talk about that? Are the hip rotators not supposed to go on?
No, hip rotators are a foundation.
Yeah, okay.
They have to work
first. So you instruct to pull the femurs, or not pull, but draw the femurs away from each other. That firms the outer hip.
Yes.
And then can you talk about the energetic aspect?
Energetic aspect is that the apana vayu, which is flowing down on inhalation, will have a much wider space. Otherwise, it's very narrow.
Right, because the femurs are moving in towards each other.
Towards each other.
But the head of the femur is clearly moving, the heads of the femurs are moving towards each other as the shaft of the femur is moving away from each other. So why is the head of the femurs going towards each other, not blocking the apana?
Because you don't want to create a disjointing sensation in the head of the femur. Knowing what happens to people often as they get older is they get that particular area dislocated. Most injuries of older people, as they are simply walking down and the hip gives way, is because of that.
Right. Isn't that also because the hip rotators are weak, just on a purely muscular level? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And the instruction that has mystified me forever is we're doing a good forward bend, as good as I can do, and then you say allow the tailbone to release forward. It would be so good if you could show this action. I just happened to bring a sacrum and a tailbone.
Yes, but let's correct the question. Okay. Not forward bend. In a forward bend, you will never feel this.
A forward fold.
Fold.
A forward fold. Okay. So I would love it if you show that. I'm going to cut here.
Let's begin much higher up.
Okay.
Assuming I don't have a scoliosis.
Yeah.
Okay? I forward fold, my whole trunk is less resting completely on the thigh or on the legs. Okay. Then there is a sense that I'm not pushing the dorsal spine forward, but I'm releasing it forward. So it retains its curve,
Right.
but bodily releases forward. That gives me a much better sense of the width, not only of the prana vayu, but along with that apana vayu also.
That's very helpful, because I think I've been mishearing that direction, thinking you're asking us to draw the tailbone forward, but you're not saying that.
No, I'm not saying
But
that.
I never really understood it.
I think if I remember right, and I think I do, I often emphasize don't move the tailbone forward, release it forward.
Right.
And you have a better sense of that doing it with your dorsal spine first.
Yes.
Okay.
I know.
Then
what
you
you're
can do
talking
the same thing with the lumbar,
about. Right.
and to some degree with the sacrum also. But when you do it with the tailbone, because there is a hinge connecting the two, this has a much more sense of releasing forward than releasing the sacrum forward.
Mm-hmm. Do you not want to release the whole sacrum forward? I mean, like you're saying, like how the thoracic can just release into the body more. Wouldn't you want the whole sacrum to release into the body more?
Yes, you would want the sacrum to release more forward.
So
But of all the areas we talk about,
Yeah.
in the neck, the cervical spine, the dorsal spine, the lumbar spine, of all of them are separate vertebrae. So there is a better sense
Right.
of releasing forward. Sacrum is fused.
right.
I don't know if a little child where there is no fusion would feel that. I would not want to try it on the child.
Right. Okay. That is very helpful distinction, and we'll have you show what you mean.
Release is forward. But in the sacrum, that release is less because these vertebrae are fused. Okay? And still there is a sense of releasing, not forcing it forward, releasing forward. Now there is a nice joint between the sacrum and the tailbone. So there is a much better sense of releasing the tailbone forward. Okay? Pelvis is more like this.
Right.
So it releases forward towards the pubis.
But it in no way is being pulled or pushed forward. It's
No,
releasing.
not pushed forward, not tucked, not untucked, just release forward.
Okay. Thank you.
First time I experienced it in my practice was in Baddha Konasana. I sat very, very, very close, completely sort of jammed against the wall, and then try and push something behind me when there is no space to push anything. Then I felt the sacrum releasing forward. And once I felt that by that kind of, I was playing with it in a sense, experimenting. But then I moved away from the wall and tried the same thing. And my Baddha Konasana changed.
So it sounds to me like one of the things that's happening when you can actually do that is you're just letting go of unnecessary tension.
Yes.
Yeah.
And hence I have always believed, although I have never tried it and would not want to try it, that under hypnosis you would do much better. The body would do much better. Whether that's healthy for the mind, I believe it's not.
Why do you believe it's not?
Because you are not training the mind. You are losing the capacity of the mind to do something.
Right.
If you can do the same thing by training the mind, it's much better.
Okay. He says many times in Iyengar classes he was told to maintain the length of the arms and forward bends, to use blocks against the soles of the feet if needed. Why is that?
Again, because most people don't lengthen the arms.
I see.
Okay, they bend the elbows and hold the feet like that.
Right.
The effect of that is they're not stretching the flank of the body enough. So it's not wrong to do that. It has a different effect on the shoulder joint, and it's desirable effect. I have definitely been in a room with Mr. Iyengar with 3-4 other students doing Paschimottanasana, bending the elbows and keeping the elbows up and holding it for 25 minutes.
And so how is that different? Or like what's the different effect there?
The effect is you're working the head of the humerus much more. The arms are trained in a very different way.
Right.
Stretching the arms forward is a different kind of training. because most people bend the elbows and let the elbows drop down in Paschimottanasana, that's why it is insisted that firstly learn to lift the elbow,
I see.
secondly learn to stretch the arms also. What you tend to do automatically, you want to see if you can do it differently.
Because it's a training of the mind. Yeah.
And
Okay.
in certainly taking the blocks in front of the feet, holding 1, 2, 3, even 4 blocks in the front, stretches the arms in a way that gives much better idea of what it means to stretch the flank of the body. With bent elbows,
Yeah.
that is never felt.
Right. I can understand that. Okay, thank you. Well, now he's hearkening back to 1982. So originally this is from Richard, originally when I first began teacher training in 1982, we were told that Janu Shirshasana meant head to knee pose. But then one day we were told that it meant head of the knee pose, the premise being that if we pressed the bent knee away from the pelvis, as in Baddha Konasana, we would deepen the forward bend. Rumor had it that the change came from on high and was made because too many students were forcing their head to the straight leg. Is there any truth to this rumor?
Yeah, too many people are rounding the back.
Yeah.
They are not doing a forward fold.
Okay.
Okay. So the instruction or the clarity or the different opinion given was, why do you people think Janu Shirshasana means only the head going to the front knee? It also means the bent knee, and it wasn't said that you are pressing the knee forward. What was said was that the brain of the posture is the bent knee. It's not the front.
It's like the back leg of standing poses.
So,
right?
Janu Shirshasana means Janu, the knee, is like the head, like the brain, really, not the head even.
Mm-hmm. So, do you feel like that's the more correct interpretation of?
Both are correct interpretations.
Okay.
You know, to an early beginner, I would not say that second part.
Right.
Okay? Both are correct.
Okay. Just two more questions. He says he was once told that every pose begins with its opposite. For example, a forward bend begins with a slight back bend. Indeed, one of the pictures on page 126 of Light on Yoga, it shows Mr. Iyengar beginning his forward fold with a definite back bend. Would you agree with this?
I would agree 1000%.
Only 1,000.
Yes. Because that makes sure that you are folding and not rounding the back.
Right. So knowing that you're going to lose a little bit of the concavity, you start with a more extreme concavity?
Yes.
Is that? Okay. Great. Okay, and then I always like to, I try to end the interview with a kind of a funny question, but...
Before you go to the funny part,
yes.
although that instruction is correct that you begin with a back bend, as it were, okay, it's for a reasonably healthy body that you do it. Okay? Somebody comes to you with a back pain,
Right.
they should not do that.
Right. Okay. Okay, so his last question, which really made me laugh when I read it. Any idea who thought of the impossibly awkward name Triangmukha Ekapada Paschimottanasana? Why not simply call it Ardha Virasana Paschimottanasana?
Because Ardha Virasana Paschimottanasana is too easy for the Westerners.
I see.
The Westerners have dominated the Easterners so much that this is the way of our getting back.
Okay, that's a great answer, but I don't think that's what your serious answer is. So can you first say it in Sanskrit, because I just slaughtered it. Can you say the name of it? Triangmukha?
Triangamukha Ekpad Paschimottanasana.
And
It is not triangle.
Okay. And then can you tell us what the interpretation of that is? The translation?
I other than the obvious interpretation, I don't know any subtlety of it.
And do you know where that name came from?
From Sanskrit language. I don't know who designed the language.
Okay, so you can't come up with a more sutra-like name for that pose?
No.
I know you like sutras, so it would seem like we could make the name of that pose a little shorter.
You see, you're talking from Light on Yoga,
I'm
Mr. Iyengar's book.
Yes.
But the fact is that if you go to different parts of India, that same pose may be given different names.
Do you know any other name for it?
No.
No.
Because I don't know many other yoga teachers who do
Okay.
that.
All right. So would it be okay if we just called it TMP?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. All right.
I mean, the one good thing about Americans is they're free to do anything.
Sort of.
Sort of.
Sort of.
In the process, they hurt themselves sometimes,
Right.
and sometimes hurt others also. That's not allowed.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to say about forward folds that I haven't covered? I'm sure I haven't covered everything, but I don't know if
We
there's
can't cover everything. It's too
No.
vast.
Yeah. But do you think it's important to say about them?
Yes, something very important to say. People who find back bends easy and enjoy them should emphasize forward bends much more in their practice.
I have heard that, and that is me, and I don't really like to hear it. But thank you for saying it. Can you say why?
Because that creates a balance.
Yeah.
Otherwise, when you move too much in one direction only, it creates a certain damage.
Yes, but I always find back bends make my lower back feel better, or they make me happier. I feel strong, when I'm doing Urdhva Dhanurasana, and when I think about doing a forward fold, I'm always resistant.
So the suggestion I would have for you is the resistance largely comes from what you are feeling in the upper body. Do forward bends where upper body is not taken down, but rather the legs are taken in, like Urdhva Paschimottanasana.
Okay. That's a good suggestion. Also, I've been playing a little bit with, just think of legs up the wall, not necessarily Viparita Karani, but doing the forward folds like that, where let's say I bring the legs into Triangmukha Ekapada Paschimottanasana, but I bring the straight leg towards my torso.
And Ria has a very good pose she can show you. Take a backbend bench, put it against the wall with a block between the wall and the bench, lie down in the back bend, put the legs up on the wall, and try and sink down as far down as you can.
So it keeps your lumbar in the right position, and you have a completely different relationship to gravity.
Yes.
So you think that's a better way to practice for people who are a little bit forward bend resistant?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very good stretch for the hamstring also.
Yeah.
And if you train the body that way, within a short period, you might love forward bends.
The irony is you've been teaching a lot of forward bends lately, and I absolutely love them and feel amazing afterwards. But if I'm left to my own devices, I'll always go more towards back bends.
Then keep coming to the class.
I will. All right. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. What I would like to do before we shut the camera off is I would love if you could just show the Baddha Konasana thing that you showed me earlier.
You hold this ball, as it were, firmly. And then, without making a loose movement of that ball, make a movement here. So you are in effect trying to lengthen the neck of the femur. I don't know if it's called neck, technical name.
I
have no idea.
I don't know what the technical name is, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So a lot of the small muscles around the head of the femur are held firm,
Very firm.
and then you're saying the shaft of the femur
Yes.
Yeah.
The shaft of
Yes.
the femur is moved out.
moved out. Okay. So that you said you were lengthening both the inner and the outer
Yeah.
bone.
Inner is automatic to lengthen.
Right.
Okay. You are lengthening the outer more.
Okay, so the hip rotators are very actively pulling, keeping the stability in the head, but you're stretching the outer, like the IT band area?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.